Hey guys, what's going on? It's Ben here, and today I'm going to be talking about the impending free agency of Paul George and where he could possibly go and what would be the best fits for him. So, to start off with, I'm going to talk about some places and landing destinations and possibilities that I think are more likely, and I'm going to finish with a few that are less likely to happen but are still possible, but just not as likely as some of the ones I'm going to list first. So to start off with, I'm going to go with the obvious choice that he could do, which is re-sign with the Thunder. So since he was traded from the Pacers to the Thunder under his old contract, he can still re-sign with the Thunder because they have his bird rights. So if he re-signs with them, he'd make about $35 million a season, and if he's actually, it might go up to around 40. But if he signed with any new team, it would be around 32 million a season, which is less, but I mean it's still a boatload of money. So the easiest and most straightforward option for him might just be to re-sign with the Thunder. As far as a basketball fit, he fit all right there. You know, they've got a good defensive mindset with Roberson and Adams, and Westbrook's a decent defender, not great. So he fits in well from a defensive standpoint. From an offensive standpoint, he fits in okay. He does okay not handling the ball as much because Westbrook dominates the ball, but a lot of times on the Pacers, PG always had the ball in his hand, so it's a bit different for him to not have the ball in his hand as much, but he is a good shooter, so he can adjust to that. So moving on from that one, the next potential landing spot I have for him is the Cavaliers if LeBron stays. So it's contingent on if LeBron stays. He wouldn't go there otherwise, but so I have two scenarios for the Cavaliers that I think he could end up going there if LeBron stays. The first is that he goes to the Cavs and they keep Kevin Love as well. This one is less likely, I think, than them trading Kevin Love to get Paul George, but the interesting thing about a lot of these scenarios I have is that Paul George can walk away and the Thunder can't do anything about it, so he's not a restricted free agent. He's unrestricted, so he can leave and they can get absolutely nothing back for him. So I think that this puts them in a much more, I don't want to say desperate position, but a much more lenient position as to their willingness to deal with other teams that want to sign him in potential sign and trade scenarios. So like an example of this is when LeBron went to Miami in 2010, that wasn't just them signing him. They actually had to do a sign and trade with the Cavaliers to get him because they didn't have enough salary space. So they got LeBron and the Cavs got maybe a draft pick and a little bit of money in his place. But this can be done with players too. It doesn't just have to be done with like a draft pick and money. You know, Paul George could be sent somewhere for another player and it would be called a sign and trade because he's signing the new contract with the other team, but he's technically signing it with his old team, and then they're just trading him right away. So that's a possibility. So under this scenario, I have Paul George doing a sign and trade where he gets shipped to the Cavaliers and the Thunder get back J.R. Smith, Tristan Thompson, and Rodney Hood. Now, a lot of these are on the contingency that the Thunder are going to be desperate to replace Paul George and they don't want to get nothing for him. So in this scenario, they get J.R. Smith back, who's a good shooter, can be a good defender. He's dropped off a bit in the last few years, but when he's dialed in, he can be good. And then they also get Tristan Thompson, who's still pretty young, around 25 years old, and actually might be more like 24 or 23. But when he's locked in, he can do really well. Scratch that, he's definitely 25. But when he's locked in, he can play really well, can get a lot of offensive rebounds, and can be good on the defensive glass as well. He's a real hustle player. You know, he could be good for some spurts with Steven Adams, but will probably be used mainly as a backup. They'd probably do something where they play him about 20 minutes a game and they lower Adams' play time to around 30 or 32, play them for a couple minutes together, but primarily play Thompson as the backup to Adams. And then they could have just a good rebounding duo with both of them on the court at one time. It would really limit spacing, but it would be okay. And the third part of this trade is Rodney Hood. This is partially to make the salaries match better with the $32 million that Paul George would sign for, but also just because I feel like J.R. Smith and Tristan Thompson is somewhat of a burden to get back. But if you also get back the untapped potential of Rodney Hood, who can someday be a 20-point scorer in this league and can hit a knockdown three-pointer with ease and be a 3-and-D player, I think that really would entice the Thunder to take on the other two contracts. And those other two guys are also grinders who have championship experience, and I don't know if they'd be good for the culture of the locker room, but I think that they'd be good in that they have a lot of experience in the playoffs and would be able to help those that don't have as much experience. And the Cavs just get Paul George in this scenario and no one else. And so in the other Cleveland scenario, they trade Kevin Love in a sign and trade for Paul George. They trade Kevin Love to the Thunder, where he reunites with UCLA teammate Russell Westbrook. And so in this trade, I have them getting Love and J.R. Smith, and that equates to about $33 million, which is what Paul George would sign for. I feel like Love is a better value for the Thunder, and again, it's contingent on them wanting to do a sign and trade, which they may not. They just may let him go. But I feel like they're in a desperate enough position that they'd be willing to take Kevin Love back for Paul George, who I think is a pretty comparably talented player. Moving on from that, I have Philadelphia as the next team on my list. I would say if he could go one place, Philadelphia would be the best place for him to go. They have such a plethora of young talent, and I think he would fit really well in there because he doesn't have to have the ball in his hands to be effective. He can just be a spot-up shooter. That would be greatly reducing his offensive ability, but if you want Ben Simmons to be dominating the ball, which I don't think he does too much of, he really spreads it around well, but if you want Ben Simmons to do primary ball handling, you can have Paul George be on the wing more and be a catch-and-shoot guy. He could play a little bit more like Klay Thompson, more so than like Durant, which is what I think he plays like when he's in Indiana, more of a ball handler and a shooter type. So Philadelphia is going to have $40 million in cap space this offseason. They have expiring contracts from Ilyasova and Redick and Amir Johnson, which total $40 million. So I think what they should do is talk to Paul George, convince him to sign for $30, and then also try and re-sign Redick for $10. And now how they would do this is they would say, Paul, if we're signing you for $30, what's the difference really between $30 and $33? You could just get some sponsorship that would make up the difference. And plus $30 is already a ton of money, and you'd be coming to a team that's already great, and you'd be in a position to win a championship instantly. And I think he would like that because he's in his prime at 27, and he's never going to be as good as he is right now. Whatever you think about him, this is his peak right now. He's about 22, 23 points a game when he's the primary option, and probably 20 or 18, 19 points when he's a secondary or third option. And I think that they could convince Redick to re-sign as well, because this year he got $23 million in his contract, which is well above what Redick deserves as a guy who really has no value outside of being a catch-and-shoot three-point shooter. He doesn't really play good defense. He can't really bring the ball up the court and handle it well. So I think that they could rationalize to him, hey, not that we overpaid you last year, but we paid you really, really well. And if you get paid $10 million this year, it's not really like we're shortchanging you. It's like we're paying you what you deserve, but just more last year and less this year. So I think that they could re-sign him and convince him along the same lines as Paul George, like you're going to be playing for a championship, so you should join in. All right, so moving on, the next one I have is the Lakers. So this coming off season, the Lakers are going to have $60 million in cap space to sign free agents, which is enough for around 2 max contracts, which they've often been saying during this last season is meant for either LeBron and Paul George, or LeBron and someone else, or Paul George and someone else. Well, in this scenario, I'm just going to take it that they're only signing Paul George and not LeBron, because that gets into too many rabbit holes and hypotheticals with what could happen. But so if the Lakers do sign Paul George, it'd probably be for around the $33 million mark. So that'd leave them with about $27 million left in cap space. And so one of their free agents is Julius Randle, and I really like Julius Randle. I like a lot of the core on that Lakers team with him and Ingram and Ball and all the other young guys that they have. I like them a lot, Kuzma. And I think that it would be a good idea to keep Julius Randle, maybe sign him for around $15 million a year. Maybe he would want more, but I feel like that's what he's worth, and they could get him to sign for that. And then maybe sign like one more catch and shoot player or 3-and-D player for around $12 million, because they need 3-point shooting because everybody does. And they need defense because every young, undisciplined team needs defense. And they were not that good of a defensive team this last year. They were middle of the pack in the lower half, so they could use it. And I like that scenario because I feel like you keep your youth with Randle, you get your experienced, definitive number one option with Paul George. And so at a certain time, you could be running a lineup of Lonzo Ball, Paul George, Brandon Ingram, Kyle Kuzma, Julius Randle. Now, it's a bit undersized, but in that scenario, you also have Paul George, who's around 6'10", at the 2 spot, Lonzo, who's 6'6", and one of the best rebounding point guards, Brandon Ingram, who's 6'9". So they're undersized at the center, but at the other positions, they're well-sized or overly sized, so they'd be fine. Okay, so those wrap up what I had down as my conventional picks, or things that I think are likely to happen. I think each of those ideas could realistically happen, and all those teams have a legitimate shot to get Paul George. And so now the teams I'm going to start going through are the ones that I don't think will happen, but could happen. They are completely within the realm of possibility. I just don't see them as happening because, honestly, teams just sometimes aren't willing to think that outside of the box, or, a lot of these ones I'm going to go through now are contingent on sign and trades. And so in a lot of scenarios, maybe the Thunder would just be too stubborn or unwilling to go through with the sign and trade for one reason or another. But these scenarios could work and I think are plausible. And so let's get into them. Okay, so as the Timberwolves homer fan, the first one that I have is sign and trade, sending Paul George to Minnesota for Wiggins back to Oklahoma City. So next year, Wiggins is going to be making $35 million, and that's right around the same max that Paul George could sign. So the Thunder would get Wiggins, who is going to be a 23-year-old young player who can score 20 points a game, is already the second option or third option on the Timberwolves, so that would not be too big of a transition for him. He would get plenty of shots because even as a third option this year, Carmelo got about 15 shots a game. So I think that Wiggins could slot in for about 18 shots a game and be fine. He doesn't bring any shooting, which the Thunder might not like, and he doesn't bring much defense, which they might not like, which are both things that Paul George has. But he is a young player who could still take a lot of molding, and everyone says, Wiggins just needs to find the right coach who will coach him up and make him a better shooter and a better defender. Well, everyone thought that was Thibodeau, but apparently it's not. So maybe Billy Donovan is the coach to do that? I don't know, but either way, I feel like the 23-year-old, 20-point-a-game scorer could be an enticing compensation for the Thunder, who would otherwise get nothing back for Paul George. All right, so that's my first one. And then I think that Paul George would fit in really well with the Timberwolves. I think he's about the same level of player as Jimmy Butler, perennial all-star. They're actually very similar players, pretty decent three-point shooters, do well when they handle the ball, good defenders, are all defensive team perennially. So I think he would be a good fit here. He basically makes up for all the deficiencies that Wiggins has and can score the same amount of points, so that's good. All right, so moving on from the Timberwolves, I have the Boston Celtics. So I don't know how this one's probably could be the least plausible or maybe the second to least plausible. I don't know, but now we're getting more into the rabbit hole theories where these ones would never happen under any circumstance, I don't think, but it's fun to think about them. Okay, so PG could do a sign and trade from sending him from the Thunder to the Celtics, and in return the Thunder would get Gordon Hayward's contract and Yabulsi, I hope I'm saying that right, Yabulsi, his contract too. He would basically just be a filler, and it would basically be Gordon Hayward for Paul George, but he'd just be a throw-in to make contracts match better. I don't think that this is a terrible trade for the Thunder. I think that's pretty good. They're essentially similar players, except that Paul George is just a bit better on defense. They both score around 20 points a game as a primary option. Paul George is around 22, 23. Hayward with the Jazz in 2017 was around 20 points a game. So I think that they're very comparable players, very equally talented. Paul George is better, but Gordon Hayward isn't a slouch. He is a good three-point shooter. He can handle the ball. I think he'd be a good replacement for him and a good option on the Thunder too, because he can be a spot-up shooter like Russell would want, and I don't think he put up as big of a fuss as someone else would, because he was going to be the second option in Boston, and he signed a contract to be Kyrie's second option, so he wouldn't be as upset about it. Moving on from that, the next trade I have is one that would be a lot less enticing to the Thunder, I think, but, it still could happen. These all could happen. Just got to remember that. So, Paul George does a sign and trade, sending him from the Thunder to the Heat, and in return, the Thunder get a plethora of grinders and, workers, a lot in the line of Steven Adams, not flashy players, but guys who can get the job done and are good players. They're not bad. They are really good players in their specific roles. So they can't anchor a team, but they're good in their roles. Okay. So the three players I have are Dion Waiters, Kelly Olynyk, and Wayne Ellington. So Dion Waiters already played in Oklahoma City with Durant and Westbrook, and he did okay. He averaged between 12 and 14 points while he was there in his various seasons. He would be the one that struggled the most between the three players coming over. He really likes the ball in his hand, and he liked making those game-winning shots for the Heat last year before he was injured for basically all of this year. But I think that he could adjust okay. He'd probably give you about 15 points a game and be a lot like Oladipo was last year for the Thunder. And so for Olynyk and Ellington, I like both of them on the Thunder because it's exactly what the Thunder need. They are in desperate need of shooting. Wayne Ellington could slot in at the 2 when Waiters isn't playing, or they could play him side by side but just have a slightly smaller lineup. And then you could play Olynyk, who I think is an upgrade over Jerami Grant or Patrick Patterson. He's younger and he's a better three-point shooter than both of those guys. And so theoretically, you could have a lineup that looks like Westbrook, Waiters, Ellington, Olynyk, and Adams. It would have good spacing with the two shooters, and Waiters can handle the ball if Westbrook's getting double teamed like that, or vice versa. And if you want to sub in Robertson for Waiters or Ellington, you could do that. Probably more likely Waiters because they need the shooting of Ellington. But I actually like this scenario, and a lot of people say that what Westbrook needs is a setup a lot like Allen Iverson in 2001, where there's one star player and then just a bunch of guys that fill their roles like Mutombo and Aaron Key and stuff like that. So I think that this would be the ideal setup if you want build that prototype of a team where you have one star and a bunch of guys that just are really good in their specific roles. Because you'd have a lot of guys that are really good on defense, really good at rebounding, really good at shooting, but no one can really put them all together. So that's one scenario. And my last scenario I like a lot. I don't know if it would ever happen. I think it'd be pretty cool if it did. And I think it would actually mutually benefit both teams involved. I think they would both be better off in the long run because each team needs what the other would be offering, I think. Alright, so my last sign and trade for Paul George is sending him from the Thunder to the Raptors. And so in return, the Thunder would get Serge Ibaka, CJ Miles, and Norman Powell, and the Raptors would just get Paul George. Now, I really like this trade a lot. I feel like it could round out the Raptors a lot and give them a solid shooting or small forward, which they haven't had in forever. You know, maybe going back to Rudy Gay, who really played poorly while he was there, but was a pretty good starting small forward at the time. And since it's just been a carousel of different guys, and right now it's being held by a platoon of CJ Miles and OG Anunoby and Norman Powell, and sometimes DeRozan slides to small forward, but it's those other guys I was talking about for the most part. So on the Raptors side of things, they'd have a starting lineup that'd probably look like Lowry, DeRozan, Paul George, Pascal Siakam at the power forward, and Valanciunas at the center. You know, everyone in there is a solid bona fide starter except for Siakam, who's been good in spurts this year, hasn't had to play super long minutes, has probably played, he's been a sub, played with the second unit more, so maybe he looks a little bit better because he's playing against second-tier guys, but I feel like he'd be okay. He's developing a lot this year, and I think would continue to in the offseason and into the next season. And I think that it would just give them a good guy who would probably be the second option to DeRozan, but would be a higher option than Lowry. And I feel like the Raptors get into this thing where either Lowry takes 30 shots and makes 10 of them, or DeRozan takes 30 shots and makes 12 of them in a game. And it just limits. They think that because they're the only two all-stars or ball handlers, that they're the only two that can take shots. But I think if you actually injected them with someone like Paul George, 3 is a lot different than 2 as far as ball handling and scoring options in the NBA. And I honestly don't know if we've ever seen 3 wing players who really can handle the ball like they would have. You know, the Heat only had Bosh and LeBron, or not Bosh. Bosh didn't handle the ball. It was Wade and LeBron. And the Warriors right now really only have Steph and Durant. I guess you can count Draymond, but I'm not going to put him in that scoring threat status. He can handle the ball, but I don't know. He's more of an assist guy rather than a score off the dribble guy. And Klay Thompson can't score off the dribble, so I'm not going to count him either. But if you had those 3 on one team, they'd all be threats to score, drive, or they could be catch and shoot guys too if the other guys have the ball. So I think that would work really well for them. And they have such a deep bench that it wouldn't really cut into their depth all that much. They'd still have Darrell Wright, Van Fleet, and Anunoby off the bench along with Pirtle. So they'd still have good depth. And on the Thunder side, they would have Ibaka probably slide into the starting power forward, and CJ Miles and Norman Powell. Norman Powell's an interesting case. I feel like he has a lot of untapped potential. He scored 55 in a game last year, and it was one of the most unsuspected 55-point games that anyone's ever had. But I feel like he could be a good 6-man in Oklahoma City. And with these new guys, you could see a starting lineup of something like Westbrook, Robertson, CJ Miles, Ibaka, and Adams. Or you could see something like Westbrook, Robertson, Carmelo, Serge, and Adams, or some variant of that. I don't think that Ibaka would come off the bench and Melo would start over him. I think that they probably play Melo at the 3, but he's being kind of slow. I really think that in this scenario, Carmelo would definitely have to come off the bench to make it work, because he's too slow and he's not that good of a shooter anymore. Or he never really was that good of a shooter, but he tried to be a stretch forward this year, and it didn't really work because he's in that awkward phase of being too slow to guard small forwards, too small to be an effective defender on power forwards, and he's not a natural shooter, but he's trying to become a spot up shooter. He does a lot better with the ball in his hands, so I don't know. Carmelo's just a conundrum who's making $30 million a year and doesn't deserve it. But I like Ibaka's shooting. He would help them stretch to the floor along with CJ Miles, and that's exactly what they need. So this is my favorite of the potential of the not so likely trades or signing trades for Paul George, for where he might end up in the offseason. So there you have it. I went over some of the different destinations I thought I might go to. The likely ones being Cleveland, staying in Oklahoma City, Philadelphia, or the Lakers. And some of the way far out there ones that would probably never happen are the Timberwolves, the Celtics, the Heat, and the Raptors. So that's it. I hope you liked the video, and I'll see you next time. All right, bye guys.